Greetings, dear brothers and sisters in Christ. This is Katherine May, and I'm your host on the House United. With me today, I have a wonderful guest that you have seen many times before in our program, and that is Mr. Donald Nelson. He has sung many times for us hymns and shared his faith through song and hymn text, and we're going to hear his story today. Isn't that just delightful? Welcome, Don. I'm so glad that you're here with me today. I first met Don at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in North Minneapolis. It's not St. Mark's anymore, 26th and Newton Avenues North, one of the many Lutheran churches on the north side. So after we were married at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, then Rick and I attended there for a while. We went to Lutheran Church of the Master in Brooklyn Center. I then started working in churches as a musician myself. I worked at Riverview United Methodist Church for a brief time, and then I was able to work at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, back to the home church of Rick, and where Don was a tenor in the choir, his wife Romaine, still there, alto. And it was one of the most delightful times in working in the churches that I had, was at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in North Minneapolis. Little did I know at the time that one of my predecessors as organist and choir director was a wonderful woman by the name of Alice Roy, and that was my standard to live up to, because Alice was held in very high regard at St. Mark's, and I didn't know actually until yesterday when I was talking to Don that this Alice Roy was his aunt.
My dad's sister.
His dad's sister. And I knew that I was doing okay when I finally could measure up, and it was said that I was as good as Alice Roy. So she had a long ministry in music.
Yes, she did.
And now, Don, we're going to go back. Nils Nilsson.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about Nils?
Well, Nils Nilsson, spelled with an I way back then, was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. I never saw him. He died, I believe, in 1918.
I might have that. Go ahead.
And but I remember up in the attic we had a chest which was filled with his carpentry tools. He was a carpenter and a cabinet maker for Rydell. It was a hyphenated name. Rydell was part of it. They were located in North Minneapolis on about 2nd Street and 24th or 26th. And that's where he worked. And so his chest was addressed to him, a steamer trunk, and was addressed to Nils Nilsson, Red Wing, Minnesota.
Spelled Red Wing
with a V, yeah.
Yes.
North America.
No, N-O-R-T.
N-O-R-t.
Because they would spell the way it sounded
yeah.
to them.
And A-M-E-R-K-A.
So Nils Nilsson, I have here, I was able to go on and find some things on the internet. At age 39 in 1900, in the census, had been married 18 years to Caroline Mossberg Nilsson.
That's correct.
Of some fame. There's some relation there to the Mossberg rifle.
There was a mayor in Red Wing named Mossberg later on, and at about the same time, Mossberg, who invented some new mechanism for a rifle or something. It was called the Mossberg rifle.
So I knew I had the right document here, because it says that Nils Nilsson in this document is a carpenter. Yeah. And how many children?
10.
10. And so Alice was your... Okay, and now I don't see her on here, so she must have been a later child.
Well,
of the two that are on this
list. Sidney came after Clarence, and then Alice was the baby.
Alice was the baby in the family.
Right.
Were any of your other uncles or aunts doing any ministry?
Blenda was married to a man named Axel Anderson, and they served. He was a pastor in Upper Michigan. I remember especially in Ishpeming.
Okay, Blenda, B-L-E-N-D-A.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of an unusual name.
Yeah, yeah.
So you said that when Nils came to this country, he was a Swedish Covenanter.
Yeah, but I want to add too that Hazel was married to one Dan Blomberg, who has a history here in the north area. He when I first became aware of their pastorate, they were in a cornfield somewhere near 50th and Knox Avenue, in what had once appeared to have been a one-room schoolhouse, is what it appeared to be. And then they moved from there and built a building on 49th at Colfax, I believe, and then north, and then subsequently up on Humboldt Avenue. The building still stands there now, and it's a Seventh-day Adventist church now, I believe.
Okay.
And
so he was in the ministry.
Yeah, Dan Blomberg and Hazel, and they had two of their sons went into the ministry, sponsored by the Free Church as missionaries in Venezuela.
Oh.
And
so why do you think that is? Why do you think, just your personal opinion, this is no official opinion of any, this is your personal opinion, why does that happen when you have one person in ministry, that there are other people in the generations following that are in the ministry?
I don't know. I suppose it's an atmosphere that's created in the home when they're being raised. My father often, not often, but occasionally mentioned in his early childhood, he could remember after going to bed and the house was dark, he could hear his father in his bedroom praying, you know, for each of the kids, right down the line for the 10 kids.
What a wonderful memory.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing I think that creates an atmosphere that sets a whole lifestyle, a whole attitude in a favorable mode toward service and the Christian life.
So he was a Swedish Covenanter, and then he went to the Free Church.
He went to the Free Church. I believe it was called the 10th Avenue Free Church. It was downtown Minneapolis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he actually emigrated to Pierce County, Wisconsin. This is from Trenton, Wisconsin, and Pierce County.
Yeah, it was a
farm.
This
document.
And they moved to North Minneapolis about 1902.
Okay.
Approximately. I just have to guess at that. My dad was born in Wisconsin in 1900, but I think Alice was born in Minneapolis.
So he was probably in the womb at this point when this 1900 census was taken then?
Yes, I would think so. Yeah, he was born October 9th. So.
Okay. So now when did the Baptists come in? Because your father was a Baptist preacher.
Yeah. Well, he went to the Free Church School in Chicago. Okay. And I believe now it's called Trinity University. It's changed significantly from what it was then. And in fact, there was kind of a spotty record of the history of the school. It started up for a while, and then it seemed to taper down and go from one location to another. And at one time, there was some affiliation with the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, too. But the old Free Church School that my dad went to was in Chicago, and he was down there for 3 years and
now this
graduated
was a college.
from there.
A college.
It's a seminary.
Seminary.
Yeah. Yes. The requirement to get into seminary in many of the churches was you didn't need a baccalaureate degree.
That's right. And especially in other denominations.
Yeah, it was true in the Baptist school at that time also. And I can remember people at the time the change came about being quite indignant, you know, that if I want to serve the Lord, why do I need 4 more years of school?
Right. Well, and then there are groups of Christians that believe that it's a godly calling, and sometimes even a degree in a seminary is a hindrance.
Well, I believe he briefly served out in the Milan, Minnesota area.
Okay, so it was in Minnesota.
But I think that was a free church.
Okay.
And someone he had known for a number of years got him pulled aside, sort of, and asked him to come and do a series of meetings at his church, which was a Baptist church. And I guess that's how it all started.
How it started, he got into the Baptist.
Yeah,
but he went to a free church seminary, not a Baptist.
Yeah, because he was a free church person.
On Christ the solid
solid rock now stand. Claim your Savior and don't look back. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. My soul, myself, I cannot save. In Jesus I will place my claim. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground will be sinking sand. When days with problems cloud the light that shows the path to Jesus' side, I'll be reminded of His love that holds me close and keeps me strong. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground will be sinking sand. There is no doubt His promises made through the cross and His shed blood will never fail to see me through the times. There is nowhere else to turn. He's always there, He's by my side, and even if I tried, I couldn't hide. So on Christ's solid rock I'll stand until He calls me home to live with Him. On Christ the solid rock I'll stand. All other ground will be sinking sand.
So let's pick it up now. He married. Was he a pastor before he married your mother Hattie?
Yes, yeah, he was. Yeah.
Okay, so he was working as single.
He was single. He was a pastor of that, what they call the 2nd Street Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, Washington, and my mother was a member there.
Okay, so did he meet her there?
That's where they met.
They met, so she's from Washington State then?
Yeah, she was raised in Mount Vernon area there.
I did find a marriage certificate for Don's parents at June 4th, 1925. So almost 100 years ago.
Yeah.
About Mount Vernon. Hattie, now her name wasn't Harriet, it was Hattie, right?
Hattie.
So what did they talk about that time that they did? What did they would tell you about that time when they were out in Washington?
Well, Mother was a nurse. She'd graduated from the Swedish hospital in Seattle, School of Nursing.
Registered nurse?
So she was a registered nurse. And she had a 1924-25 Model T Ford Coupe.
Of her own?
Of her own, yes.
Whoa,
and
an independent woman.
Yeah, now that might be the thing that first attracted my dad. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, she was. She was, you know, the nurse's life and study was far different then than it is now. They didn't have all sorts of aides and LPNs and one thing and another.
My mother-in-law also, Esther.
Yeah, right. And so they learned how to scrub the floor.
Practical. And actually there's a wonderful old book. It was called, I think it was called A Lamp is Heavy, that my mother gave me at one time. I wanted to be a nurse. Well,
is that a story about nursing?
I'm not big on blood.
A Nightingale nurse or something?
No.
A lamp, I mean?
Whatever this book was, it was about a woman who had gone to nursing school, like the old style, where you start at the bottom and you go to school, but you're also working in the hospital, and you start with bedpans and work your way up.
bedpans and mop the floor.
Mop the floors
yeah.
and then work your way up.
Yeah.
So that's by how I at least have some knowledge of that time. So did she continue as a nurse after they got married?
Yes, she did.
Really?
Not for long, however.
Yeah.
And most of my childhood, she did not work, except at the home. And
Well, a pastor's wife is very much a part of the ministry.
well, for the style that my dad had, my mom, in retrospect, was a rock. I mean,
Yeah.
she was left alone
A lot.
a lot, you know, especially with his job as editor of the Baptist Evangel and all
Okay,
that.
let's get into that now. So we're moving past here. This is Seattle, Washington.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we move on, and now we are in Elam Baptist in Chicago.
Well, you got to go to Bethel Baptist in South Minneapolis
Okay,
first.
so from Seattle, Washington, Second
To Bethel,
Baptist,
yeah.
to Bethel Baptist,
Yeah.
in South
And
Minneapolis.
so we lived on
Now, when were you born in this?
1930. My dad was pastor at Bethel Baptist Church
Okay.
on the south side. I think it was on 24th Street.
Do you have any recollections of that time?
Oh, no. I was born in Midway Hospital in St. Paul.
Now, were you
and-
where are you in the order of babies?
I'm third.
Third, okay.
And I was brought into this world by a very prominent Baptist, Dr. W.F. Wyden.
Okay.
And he was very well known in the Baptist circles. And I believe he was a member of First Baptist, downtown Minneapolis. I
Okay.
think that was his home church. But I think his brother and many other people he knew were members of my dad's church.
Okay.
Anyway, that was the guy that brought me into the hospital and was my dad's doctor and so on.
Okay, so Bethel Baptist, South Minneapolis. Did he seek these calls, or was he called to these? Did he seek to go other places? Did he have a little bit of a wanderlust?
I'm not sure.
So you're,
I'm sure he had friends here in Minnesota, you know, and some history in Minnesota. And so I think that probably the call came out of the blue, but I'm not sure about
So
that.
before we move on to Chicago here, let's get back to your mom and a pastor's wife, because we didn't have cell phones. She wouldn't have had a cell phone where she could call him anytime. If he was out on the calls or he was out doing his ministry, he was out,
Yeah,
unobtainable.
yeah,
general.
true, very true.
So she had to be the one that was disciplinarian, the one who...
Well, yeah, and I got a
Was-
story to tell about that
Okay.
too. After we moved to Chicago, one afternoon, I think it was my brother and I sitting across the street from the parsonage, and there was a ball field there, and heard my mother call. And I said to my brother, let's pretend like we don't hear her.
Oh, no, that's not a good idea.
Dad was not home, but when Dad did come home after Mother probably dragged us by the short hair, I distinctly remember she said, I think they should have a spanking. And I got a spanking.
Were you the worst for it? Was it faithful for you the rest of your life, that spanking?
Probably.
Okay, now we're talking
That's
about...
the
I'm
earliest.
doing this in relation to, you know, because I've had spankings too.
That's the earliest one I remember.
But she would have been taken care of, you know, she had to do all the household chores,
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah,
appointments, everything.
typical
yeah.
housewife.
Yeah.
And it was after we got to Chicago.
Elam Baptist,
Elam Baptist Church in Chicago.
South Side.
73rd and Greenwood. Just off a block and a half from South Chicago Avenue, which is a main drag. But it was after he became editor of the Evangel and had other duties that sent him traveling from one end of the country to the other.
Okay, so he became also, was he doing the Baptist Evangel, the news magazine?
Yeah, yeah.
Was he doing that at the same time as still being a pastor at Elam?
He started out on a part-time basis, you know, because the need for another pastor within the conference headquarters is one that developed gradually, you know, and so
Okay.
he filled in for a while, and then they determined that there was room for a full-time situation there. So he went on, and his duties included managing the bookstore that they had on Belmont Avenue in Chicago.
Because he was a scholar, that was actually quite ideal for him.
A scholar?
Well, he got a PhD.
Well, that was later.
Oh, okay.
But anyway.
It wasn't a scholar at that time. He was only a scholar later.
It was just one of the things that they added to his job description to justify the expenditure of funds to hire him, I suppose. And then he was declared or assigned to be some sort of advisor to the youth groups of the Swedish Baptist Church, and that involved coast-to-coast travel. So
what did he do for these youth groups?
Generally speaking, he was just a connection, and he would go, and I suppose, I never discussed it in detail with him, but I suppose they would try and set up the appropriate programs for each church that he visited. And
then he was an editor for the Baptist Evangel. I always say Evangel, it's not, it's Evangel. And did he have a byline? Did he write an article for every newsletter, or did he?
No, well, it was a bi-weekly publication.
Okay.
I know, maybe I should say twice a month, yeah.
Twice,
semi-monthly, yeah. And he had to, there's an editorial, and then editorial content of the papers, especially the area where they did one paragraph each on anyone that submitted information from a local church. And he was in charge of putting that all together and that sort of thing. So
I did find actually online from 1936 Baptist Clarion, another that was for Bethel. It wasn't Bethel Institute in St. Paul.
Yeah, that's the Institute's publication, the Clarion.
It says Reverend Sidney B. Nelson, former pastor of the Elam Church of Chicago, is now one of the editors of the Baptist Evangel. And so now you're in Minneapolis at that time.
No.
1936. Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
So now he got a call to come to Minnesota. Is that why you moved? No. Okay, he wanted to be, let's put this in order. Okay, so he wanted to be a traveling evangelist.
Yes.
And he'd gotten a taste of what that would be like. He was traveling for the.
That was a situation that was something in the back of his head, I think, for some time. He enjoyed preaching and had an excellent reputation.
Was there a particular audience he wanted to reach, or people in general?
He wanted to reach the unchurched.
The unchurched.
He wanted to get a big tent and pitch it out in the country somewhere and
that was so
small
common.
towns.
I actually have a collection of all these old postcards of different evangelists, the traveling evangelists. And that wasn't it wouldn't have been an easy life either.
No, there was no amplification, for instance.
No.
And sometimes it would rain.
And sometimes but he had to finance it.
Yeah.
So he
organized the Nelson's Christian Service Company.
Very enterprising man. He took care of his
St.
own
Paul.
upkeep.
Yeah, that was the idea. That the business would provide the finances to enable him to travel and evangelize.
So he had a business that Nelson's Baptist.
Nelson's Christian Service Company.
Nelson's Christian Service.
Yeah.
I actually found some ads for it that were published. So now we're getting close to 1940, or about 1940. You were here.
1940 is the year we came up to Minneapolis.
And what happened in 1940? The big storm? The big storm, Armistice Day Storm. And Don has got a first-hand account of what that was like. Because the business was in St. Paul, but you lived in...
We lived in North Minneapolis.
North Minneapolis.
Yeah.
So you were at the business because, of course, any type of business like this would have been a family business.
Yep.
You were about 11, 12 years old at that time.
That's correct, yeah.
And
11.
so you had all gone.
Well, no, I was 10, actually.
10?
No, actually, I was 9 at the time of the storm.
9, okay, and actually that's what it says here.
The storm was after... No, I got to take it back.
I was 10. 9.
I was 10 in 1940.
All right, 1940, when the census was taken, you were 9. So then you turned 10 before November 11th.
The storm was 13 days after my birthday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were all of you there? Ann, Sidney, you and Lois, you were all with
Mom?
No,
it was a Saturday, so we weren't in school. And that morning, Mom and Dad and my brother and myself went to St. Paul.
Okay, what happened to Ann and Lois?
I don't know. I suppose they were home, and Ann was
Taking care of Lois.
Taking care of Lois, yeah.
Okay, so you're over in St. Paul now.
Yep.
At that time, the business was on.
At that time, it was
Bosworth.
on the fourth floor of the Ryan Building.
Fourth floor of the Ryan Building, downtown St. Paul.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Right
And
on
so
Robert
you had
Street.
Printing equipment.
No printing equipment at that location, not
Okay.
yet. No.
And it's beautiful in the morning.
It was a nice day, yeah. And my earliest memory is looking out the window up on the fourth floor and seeing the big flakes starting to come. It had been raining, and now it's starting to snow.
Rain and then snow.
Yeah,
It was too warm.
Well, like the article said, it turned to sleet and then snow.
The article he's talking about, I have a Wikipedia article here about the Armistice Day blizzard.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when it got bad enough, Dad told Mom, take the boys, go home.
So did you have two cars there, or you had? She
No,
took
just
the car?
one, just one car.
So she took the car and
we
went
were
home, or you
driving
went by streetcar?
Driving a '36 Plymouth that we had since Elam.
So you took the car and didn't take the streetcar home?
No, and that's a good thing, because as we were traveling along University Avenue and at the height of this storm and blowing wind and everything, or the blizzard, there were two instances where there were streetcars sitting sideways in the middle of University Avenue.
I bet you can vividly see that.
Oh, absolutely.
So you would have
never
traveled
forget
through
that.
the University of Minnesota, down University Avenue, over to
I
north,
suppose
across the river over
I'm
to
not
north?
sure just where we turned off of University Avenue. Could have been up northern,
Probably
northeast.
Lyndale or Broadway.
Well, it's possible. But anyway, my next real vivid memory is turning into the alleyway behind the house.
Where was your house at that time?
Near 30th and Fremont, 2947 Fremont.
Okay.
And we turned into the backyard, and that's where we got stuck.
In the
yard.
Get stuck in the yard. You didn't have to.
We were home.
So they were home. About what time did you get home then? Before supper?
Well, I was probably getting close to supper time. Yeah.
And so then you wouldn't have heard from your father. He wouldn't have called on the telephone.
No, and the next really vivid memory I have is looking out the window. We lived up on the it was a duplex, and we were upstairs, and had the big window out in front and the roof of the porch visible out the window, and is all this blowing snow, and just watching the snow gradually get deeper and deeper.
And then you recalled that you were wondering how your father was going to get.
Yeah, we did. I didn't learn until the next day that it took my dad at least till 2 o'clock or so in the morning to get home.
So he might have left sometime in the afternoon.
And I know that he had been on a bus, he'd been in a cab, and he had walked.
I wonder if he was even dressed properly for walking.
Yeah, he probably wasn't. You know.
So to finish off the Armistice Day, a total of 145 deaths were blamed on the storm. People were totally unprepared. It started out as a beautiful day, and the hunters went out hunting because it was such a lovely day. They wanted to take advantage of the weather and go hunting. There was no work or school along the Mississippi River. Totally unprepared, and it started snowing like this. 50-mile-an-hour winds, 5-foot waves overcame, and that was on the Mississippi
That'd
River.
Be on Lake Pepin, I suppose.
5-foot waves on the river, it says here. So duck hunters, about half, 49 deaths of duck hunters that day. In Watkins, Minnesota, 2 people died when 2 trains collided in the blinding snow. On Lake Michigan, 66 sailors died on 3 freighters. 13 people died in Illinois, 13 in Wisconsin, 4 in Michigan, and the rest in Minnesota. And additionally, 1.5 million head of turkeys intended for Thanksgiving dinner across Minnesota perished from exposure. And that is probably the only humorous thing that we could ever find in this terrible, terrible storm, is that the poor turkeys, they were flash frozen, and of course there was no way to keep them fresh, probably, for that. Okay, so now the traveling evangelist, he wants to do this. You've got the printing. It moves to the Bremer building in St. Paul. Now he has printing equipment.
Yeah.
And now we're going to pick up this story again in our next program. So tune in next week, because this is a really interesting interview. We're going to move on from Minneapolis. We're going to go up to Isanti and follow the story, and then into Don's life. So thank you for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless. The House United is produced by Rick and Mary May at Northwest Community Television in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. We thank you for joining us today. If you have any comments, we would appreciate you telephoning Northwest Community Television at 763-533-1710. God bless you, and remember, God always keeps His light on for you.